All right. Hello, audience. Today is the next episode of Table Talk with Alex Guevara. Today I've got a special guest. We've got Rio White from the Owl Hour here at Owl Radio today with us to talk about some games.
Hello, Alex. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I sure hope it is.
I'm excited to learn about these games, of which I haven't played in quite some time, but I think I might start getting back into some of these things.
Yeah, well, it's pretty exciting to be out there in the world of tabletop gaming. I personally love it. That's why I do this show. So I guess you ready to get started, Mr. White?
I believe I am.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about the card game Uno. I love Uno. I play Uno all the time. I've played it for years. And I think there's some things about Uno that you guys might learn that might blow your mind a little bit. What do you think, Rio?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember playing Uno a lot in high school, and I believe those memories were quite fond. I never had a negative experience with it. I just don't quite remember how it goes, and I'd like to learn a lot more about it.
Well, you haven't had a negative experience yet. Play with me and you're going to be sad.
Oh my goodness, Alex.
What can I say? I'm great at what I like to talk about.
All right, well, we'll see.
Well, I guess to get some starting here, Rio, I have a question for you. How old do you think the game Uno is?
Well, most card games in the United States are quite old, so I would have to say over 100 years old.
How would you feel if I told you that you are wrong?
Um, well, in that case, I'd like to know how I'm wrong and how far off I am.
So, for this, we actually don't need to go too far back. Not even a full century. We're going back to the 1930s.
Okay.
So, in the 1930s, there was this game that started up in Germany called Mau Mau. Ever heard of it?
I have not. That does not sound like a German game, but I'll have to believe you because you're the expert here.
I could be pronouncing it wrong, but by all means, it's traced back to Germany. Who knows how old it is? But this is when written versions of the game started appearing and becoming popular. So Mau Mau was played with, there were two ways to play it. So you could use a French suited deck of cards, but if you used the French deck, you had to remove 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. Or you could go with the German style 32 card deck, because Mau Mau is a game played with 32 cards. It's weird. I've never played it. I never have plans to play it, but it is there. So the way this game works actually has a lot of inspiration for what we use in Uno today. Mainly that in Mau Mau, if a player runs out of cards, they must say Mau. If you don't say Mau, you get penalty cards. Now, in the special case of Mau Mau, they still used jacks from the royal cards. So if you went out on a jack, you had to say Mau Mau. I don't know why. I don't know what's special about jacks. It's an old game. It's weird.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it gets to be weird. It's got that, oh, I'm a piece of history label on it. But actually, it is still played today. But we're talking about it on the Uno episode, so I think you can see which one of those is the one that's still popular. So a little bit further into the history. Now, Mau Mau came to the States somewhere in there. I mean, it's in the whole immigration after the war thing. You know how it goes in history. But we're going to fast forward to 1971. This guy named Merle Robbins. He was a barber. He owned a barber shop. He had some friends in business. And in Reading, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, he decided that he was going to create a card game. Now, we'll go over the reasons why he ended up doing it later, because I think it's fascinating. But all you need to know right now is that he decided he was going to make this card game. This man spent $8,000 to have 5,000 copies of this game printed, and he sold them directly from his barbershop.
Wow. Haircut and a show.
Exactly. Here's the thing, though. He wasn't much of a business type. He had some friends in the industry, but not so much him. So eventually, he decided to sell the rights to Robert Tezak, a funeral parlor owner in Joliet, Illinois. He sold the rights for a little over $50,000, and he got a royalty of 10 cents per game sold.
Whoa.
Now, Zach was a little more business savvy. He had some friends in the businesses as well, but he actually did have some knowledge. So he decided, you know what? I'm going to form a company. And he formed this company called International Games Incorporated in some offices behind his funeral parlor. And he had games, specifically Uno, produced by Saltzman Printers in Maywood, Illinois. So, I mean, he was going pretty steady for a while. Uno was growing in popularity as we went on, and a little over 20 years later from the original creation of Uno is when we see the Mattel buyout.
Oh, okay. And that's when it went national?
That's when it went international.
International.
In 1992. Now, fun fact for all you nerds out there, Mattel purchasing International Games Incorporated was the second time they acquired a game company.
What was the first one?
Something that does not exist anymore. They made toys in California, and then everybody forgot them.
That's a sad reality right there.
So that's really the history of Uno. I mean, once you get there, you get to what we know now as the modern version of Uno. Some slight variations came out later, but we'll go over those in a bit. For now, let's talk about some of the mechanics of the game.
Okay, let's go.
Now, everybody knows the basics of Uno, right?
I did at one point.
At one point, he did know.
But unfortunately, my memory's not quite what it once was in terms of card games. I mean, I remember Blackjack and some of the other games that we used to play, but I don't quite remember Uno for some reason. At least how to play it.
Well, you're going to remember after today.
All right.
You'll
I'm
definitely
excited.
remember after the show when I beat you at Uno.
Oh, my goodness.
So, Rio, I have another question for you.
Okay.
I would like to know, how many cards do you think are in a deck of Uno cards?
Well, based on the way you're asking me, I'm assuming it's not 52. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm gonna go with 80.
80 cards. Good guess. Good guess. What do you think those 80 cards consist of? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I do know there's different colors of Uno: red, green, blue, yellow. Certain amount for each of those. So I don't know. I'm honestly not sure where I got that number from, but I'm just guessing at this point.
Well, I will have you know, Mr. White, there are 108 cards in a deck of Uno cards.
Oh, wow.
And the breakdown of those, it's nothing particularly special, but I think it's interesting because I'm me. So, of course, we have 25 of each of the four colors: red, green, yellow, and blue. We have 0 through 9. Then we have reverses, skips, and draw twos, and those are also colored.
Okay.
So between those, you get 25. Then, of course, we have our wild cards and our wild draw 4 cards. And there's 4 each of those two kinds. Now, specifically, skips, draw twos, and reverse cards are known as action cards. This is relevant because it comes up in the rules a little bit later, which we will talk about. But for now, we're going to go over some of the basic mechanics of the game. Now, Uno is a shedding type card game. What do you think that means, Mr. White?
That means at some point during the game, you get so stressed out that hair starts falling out of your head.
I mean, I'm not going to doubt that it happens. I'm sure it could happen to you a little bit later when we start playing
You might
this
be that
game.
good.
But no, shedding type card game means that your goal is to get rid of all the cards in your hand. Now, there's a lot of card games that fall into this category. So whether they use special decks, whether they use standard decks, whether they use matching in the gameplay, all of it requires shedding, putting it into the shedding type card game. Now, within shedding type, we have what is known as the Crazy Eights family of games.
I've heard of Crazy Eights. I've heard they're really crazy. We got to do something about them.
I think we do need to do something about them, but that's why we have Uno.
Oh, okay.
The little bit more sane younger brother, I guess. Uno is what it is. Now, it is in the Crazy Eights family of games. Would you like to know why that is?
Yes, why is that?
Because Uno is almost a carbon copy of Crazy Eights.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you've never played Crazy Eights, this might come as a surprise. But here's the thing. That guy I talked about earlier, Merle, I believe his last name was Robbins, the barber.
The barber, yes.
Yes, now he and his family, they absolutely loved Crazy Eights. I mean, what else do you have to do? It's the 70s, you got to do something. Might as well play some cards.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
Well, his family loved playing Crazy Eights, to the point where at one point, he had a bit of a dispute with his son.
Uh-oh.
Didn't know how the rule worked. We don't know what rule the dispute was about or what happened. But it got them so worked up that Merle said, you know what? Fine. I'll make my own rules.
That is something else. I mean, imagine if you were playing a game with your parent and they were like, you know what? You don't get to win, son. I'm going to win.
Oh,
That's
man.
something else.
You know, I might do that to you a little bit later, but
Uh-oh.
But we'll see about that.
I have to
I'll
prepare
pull out some of the
myself for this.
variations of Uno. There's a lot of them. We're not gonna go over them all because that would take hours and hours. But anyway, so Crazy Eights, he decided that hey, I'm gonna modify the rules. So he took some of the royal cards and he turned them into what we now use as action cards. I believe it was Kings as skips. Queens is reverse, and Jacks is draw 2. I could be wrong. I don't remember exactly what I read about it. It's kind of murky because it was the 1970s, and they didn't exactly have a home movie where they talked about how he made Uno. So, moving into how you win the game. How do you think you win the game, Rio?
Well, by shedding all the cards, I suppose, to some degree.
Well, you're not wrong, but there's more to it.
I figure there is. I'm not sure what that would be.
A lot of people are not aware of the actual objective of Uno.
Oh.
Of course, everybody knows, you shed your cards, you try to be the first one to go out. But I have never in my life played with someone who actually uses the proper objective.
Well, that makes you all the more powerful.
It sure does. The way to win Uno is to make it to 500 points.
Oh, okay. Now, how do you get there?
You get points by going out during a round, and whatever cards everybody else has left, you get points based on that. There's some weird little things that happen with that we can talk about in a bit, but that gets a little more beyond the basics of the game.
Right.
Especially considering almost nobody plays with this 500-point rule as far as I'm aware. I'd like to try it, but at the same time, I can barely handle one round of Uno with my friends before they go a little mad.
Ooh, is it because you're too good?
It's because of the chaos.
Ooh, the chaos.
House rules made Uno famous, and I love them. We'll talk about those soon. So, when you first start in Uno, 7 cards are dealt to each player. You got to have your hand of 7 cards. And, well, once you get those cards in your hand, you got to flip something over so that you have your discard pile. And, of course, you play on the discard pile. But a lot of people, in my experience, they usually flip the discard pile until you have a numeral card. That's not how you play the game.
Oh.
If you flip an action card or a special card as the first card of play, it actually has some fun little effects.
Oh, okay.
So, if we were playing Uno, I deal the cards. We've got our draw pile here. I flip it over. It's a skip. What do you think happens?
It goes to me? Goes to my turn?
No.
Uh-oh.
The player to my left gets skipped. Unfortunately, if it's just the two of us, that means you get skipped.
So I get skipped if you draw a skip on the first draw.
Yes.
Man, this world sometimes.
What do you think happens with a reverse card?
I don't even know. That's some sort of a philosophical thing. I don't know what would happen.
If you get a reverse card for the first discard, the dealer gets to play first.
Oh.
So if you have a group of 5, normally you got Billy over here on my left. He
Billy?
wants to play in this counter or in this clockwise game. And I draw that reverse, and I get to go first, and we proceed to play with counterclockwise notation.
Counterclockwise. Wow.
Yeah, so whoever's on my right, let's say Sue Ann is over
Sue
here
Ann.
on my right.
Sue Ann and Billy.
Yeah, Sue Ann and Billy, we're a bit of a southern radio station here, a bit of a southern organization. So I guess we've got some deep south fellas playing the game with us.
Yeah.
Yeehaw. So the next action card that can have an effect at the beginning of the game is the draw 2. Now, unfortunately for Billy on my left here, he gets to draw 2 cards and loses his turn.
Oh my goodness.
So draw 2 at the very beginning of the game pretty much does what it does in the normal game. Then you have the wild card. The player to my dealer's left declares the first color to be matched and plays a card in it. Very simple, pretty much just the regular effect of a wild card. And then, of course, we've got the wild +4, where this is a real silly one. I think this is the funniest thing. If you get a wild draw 4 for the first card on the discard pile, all you got to do is put it back in the deck. And then you shuffle the cards and start all over.
Wow. That's crazy stuff.
What can I say? The start of the Uno game can be considered when somebody loses.
Yeah, it sounds very fascinating. You have all these different scenarios that can happen.
And you know what? I almost never seen them used.
Oh, wow.
I like them. I think it's fun because it means when I get to deal, I don't have to deal with problems. Everybody else, of course, tough luck. So, going on from the very beginning of the game, generally you will be playing in a clockwise order. You match cards to the discard pile by their color or their number or what have you. Now, I mean, this is pretty easy. You can match a 1 to a 1. You can match a blue to a blue. Stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. It's exactly like it is in the Crazy Eights family of games. But playing can also see people invoke special cards. Special cards are those action cards, your wild cards, stuff that we've talked about a little bit that has an effect at the beginning of the game. Of course, it also impacts during the game. Skip is pretty basic. The next player in sequence loses a turn. Reverse switches the direction. So if you're going clockwise, it switches to counterclockwise. If you're going counter, you switch to clockwise.
Interesting. I mean, my extent of knowledge on the reverse card seems to be some of these memes that talk about, something going on and someone pulls out their reverse card and it happens to the first person.
I have seen some of these memes. It's always great fun. I always have to wonder, does it actually work?
Yeah, I'm not sure it always makes sense, but yeah, memes aren't necessarily always supposed to make sense.
I guess that's true. Maybe next time I get a speeding ticket, I'll pull one out
and say,
see what happens.
You officer, you got the rest for you got the ticket now.
Oh. So then we have a draw 2. Draw 2 is pretty simple. You match it to color. Person to your left or right, depending on the order of play, draws 2 cards. Now, there's a lot of things that happen based on house rules with this, but these are not in the standard rule set. That's why they're house rules. Same applies to wild draw 4s. But first, we've got the wild card. Players get to decide what the color will be. Very basic. If I play a wild card, I can say, ooh, I want it to be yellow. Now, this card can be used on any turn, even if you have a matching color card. And you can use this card, the wild card, to pick the color that is already in play. I could play a wild card on a blue discard, and I could say, hey, I want it to be blue. That's completely legal. Sometimes it's a pain in the neck, but it's absolutely allowed. Now, the wild +4, wild draw 4 card, that's where we get a little bit muddy. A lot of people don't use this card properly.
What happens?
So, according to the standard rules, The wild draw 4 can only be played if the player has no other cards that match the current color in play. I see a lot of people use this card just whenever they want. I guess that's alright if you decide you're going to ignore the rules, which of course is possible. But, you know. But, sometimes things get a little bit muddy. Not everybody follows this perfectly. It is what it is. But it's one of my favorite things because you can enact a penalty based on this wild draw 4.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Of course, the wild draw 4 also does cause the next player in sequence to draw 4 cards, and the person who plays it picks the next color, like a wild card, but that's not the fun part. Like I said, there is a penalty. We'll talk about the penalty soon, because there's more than one penalty in Uno.
Oh my goodness. That's scary. You can get penalized in a game.
It's not a game anymore, Mr. White.
This is real?
Unfortunately so.
Oh my goodness.
That's how Uno goes.
Uno is real life. I mean, this is serious stuff.
Unfortunately, it is too serious. I have seen people go crazy over Uno.
Wow.
It's like Mario Kart. It's like Monopoly. You play with the wrong people, you might end the night missing a few teeth.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I didn't know such a conflict could be, created by Uno. I mean, in my family, it was always Scrabble that caused the most, friction. But I guess Uno has its own world of chaos as well.
That is true, but of course there is always order within the chaos, and thus we get to even more mechanics of the game. So, we've talked about discarding, we've talked about playing from your hand. Now there's more to it. You can also, of course, draw cards. You draw from the deck, and you either have to play that card you draw, or keep that card. No other card can be played from your hand on that turn. Here's the thing. I don't like this rule. Personally, I love following game rules a lot because, usually, like in the Monopoly episode, I talked about how it helps you keep the game succinct. In this case, it makes some interesting penalization plays that you can do. But this one, I think, is a little bit silly. The official rules do state that you can only draw one card. Personally, when I play the game, we draw till we play.
Oh, okay.
You don't get to just pick up one card and call it a day. No, you keep going until you can play. I personally love playing that way because I think it really adds to the longevity of rounds. Again, if you're playing with the 500-point rule, this might not be something you want to pursue, but at the same time, maybe it is. If somebody has to draw till they play, they're going to have a lot more cards when they get out, or when you get out. So you get a lot more points that way.
I think I see what you're saying. I mean, it does add a little more of an interesting element to it that can actually make it a little more exciting in a sense.
It really just boils down to who you're playing with. I mean, if you want to try to break out these kinds of little house rules, absolutely do it. Games are what you make them. Or you could always be a stickler and just stick to what's written down. Either way.
I think improvisation can be fun, but I'm assuming with your friend group that you said there was some amount of chaos involved with that. That'd be kind of interesting.
It gets a little scary if I'm being honest. We'll go over why a little bit later. We use some of the popular house rules, but we're not there yet. So, I said this earlier, but just to reiterate, wild cards can be played at any time, even if you have a color that matches what is in play. Same goes if you have a number that matches what is in play. If the entire deck is used during the game, the top discard is set aside and the rest of the pile is reshuffled to create a new deck. Play proceeds. Normally, this is pretty standard. I've never met anyone that doesn't want to do this. I'm sure those people are out there somewhere, but they are not welcome in my house.
Oh my goodness, Alex. Exclusionary.
I'm a bit of an elitist when it comes to my games, Rio. I'm sure you've figured that out by now.
Yes, I can understand that. You are quite well versed in these games, and therefore you have a certain standard to which you must play.
I sure do. You don't have as many games as I do in my collection without getting to be a little bit close to the rule books. But it is what it is. One other thing of note, trading cards in Uno is entirely and utterly illegal.
Illegal?
You cannot trade cards in an Uno game.
Oh my goodness. Who would do that?
I don't know why anyone would
happens?
trade. I've seen it happen.
Oh my goodness.
Not in my games, of course. Like I
Yes.
said, it is illegal and I follow the rules on this. I don't like card trading. I think it's scummy. I think it's just makes a whole mess of the game. But if you play like that, then I guess to each your own.
Well, if it's illegal, they should be fined up to, $1,000.
Punish to the full extent of the law.
Yes.
The illegal card trade. Crossing the borders between players.
It's worth investigating. But so in your case, that is not acceptable, and in your games, it won't happen. But you said, unfortunately, you've witnessed it in other settings.
Unfortunately, yes, back when I was in high school, people played Uno a lot, and I saw this kind of underhandedness happening far too often for my tastes. That's why I never really participated in these kinds of games in the schoolyard while we were eating lunch.
Yes, I mean, it's kind of a Wild West with the school card scene. You just never know some people what their motives are, and just never know exactly how they're going to play the game and how far they're willing to go to win at a particular game. So I guess, generally speaking, having a good group of friends outside of school to play was probably much more preferable.
You are absolutely correct. Now, of course, things can still get messy within your friend groups, especially when it boils down to the win condition, which, speaking of, a round is won when you run out of cards in a hand. Of course, this is a rule that some people use and some people don't. I think it depends on your situation. If you are down to one card, you must shout Uno.
Uno.
That's the name of the game. It's one in Spanish.
Mao, in whatever language that game was in. German.
Who knows what language Mao came from? It certainly doesn't sound German. But Uno does sound Spanish, and that's because it is. But if you have one card left, you say Uno. And if you fail to do so, it invokes yet another penalty.
Oh my goodness.
Everybody knows this one. It's the penalty where you have to draw two cards.
Mm.
Play continues because, unfortunately, you were too slow to win the game.
That'll probably be my demise. I'm pretty slow when it comes to games.
We know you are, Rio. Don't worry. I'll go easy on you.
Thank you.
So, moving on from our mechanics of the game, that's pretty much the basics. That's everything you really need to know to sit down and play Uno if it's a standard game. There's some misconceptions about the rules, though. And this is where we get to talk about that penalty I was talking about earlier with the wild draw 4. Again, the wild draw 4 card may only be played legally if no other cards in your hand can be played. And when this happens, you can, if you're playing in a game that is actively using this rule, somebody else can challenge your wild draw 4.
Oh my.
If your wild draw 4 gets challenged, you must show them your cards, your hand, and they will verify whether or not you actually can play the wild draw 4. Now, if you get caught lying,
Oh no.
red-handed, then you just have to draw the 4 cards yourself. However, if you challenge somebody's draw 4, and they are in fact legally playing the draw 4 card, you get to draw 6 cards.
6 cards. That is a cruel punishment, but one that I guess is fair considering the circumstances.
You take the 4 cards from the card, and of course, it is the standard 2-card penalty in Uno. It happens, and usually when somebody doesn't remember to say Uno. But in this case, it can also happen because of the draw 4. Now, again, Uno is a points-based game with a goal of 500. A lot of people just play till somebody goes out. Perfectly fine. I think it's all right to do that. I mean, if you only want to play one round of Uno, then you only want to play one round of Uno. It's that simple. But here's the way that works. So number cards, if you're going to the 500-point goal, number cards count their face value. So 0 through 9 is 0 through 9. Any action card counts as 20 points. So skips, reverses, and draw 2 cards are 20 points. The wild and the wild draw 4 both count for 50. You do not want the game to end if you still have one of these in your hand, because that means whoever you're playing against just got a big injection of points to their score.
Oh my.
Now, another thing to know about this little rule is that if somebody goes out by playing a draw 2 or a wild draw 4, you have to pick up those cards before calculating the points.
Oh wow. So you have to actually account for that.
Yes. Some people don't like doing that, but it is what it is. Now, that's really it for the rules conceptions. There's not a whole lot of confusion when it comes to how the game actually works. Like I said last week or 2 weeks ago with Monopoly, it was just a whole mess when you get into what people know and what people don't know. But people with Uno are pretty good at reading the rules. Nothing like 60% of people that haven't read the rules in this one.
Oh wow. Then that's Monopoly number?
That is Monopoly.
I think I would be one of those 60%, especially I had a little bit of an incident in middle school where we played Monopoly, and I evidently, did something wrong in the game, and I think my classmates caught on to that, and I had extra money that I had siphoned into my hand, and I was expelled from the game, and I was left to be in the corner of the classroom by myself because I didn't play fair. But that's middle school Rio for everybody.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a cheater on the air.
It was a long time ago. I believe that my behavior at the time does not reflect who I am now. I think I have shown growth, but I hope that somebody will give me a chance and I will not cheat in the next game that I play.
Yeah, we'll see about that. We'll see if he's speaking the truth on this show.
I will put my hand on the KSU Student Media Handbook, and I will swear upon that.
I guess we'll take it for now. Come back a little bit later to hear that. But we're going to move on to some house rules. Now, of course, like I said earlier, house rules have made Uno as famous as it is. I love house rules. I think it's great when you have some people that agree on using them, because you get some real silly stuff when these kinds of rules are enacted. My personal favorite is called progressive Uno, also known as stacking Uno. For those of you who don't know what this means, if one of the two types of draw cards is played, and the following player has the same card, they can play that and stack the penalty, passing it along to the next player. +4s can't be stacked on +2s, and +2s can't be stacked on +4s, but in this situation with the draw 2 cards, color doesn't matter. I have played in games where this is an active rule, and we have seen a combination of 4 decks of Uno cards, which, do the math, that's what, 432 cards?
Oh my goodness.
So that's a lot of draw 2s that you can possibly pick up.
It's a lot of math, too.
It is a lot of math. So I've seen rounds where you end up drawing 10 cards because of these draw 2 stackings. It gets messy, and it gets chaotic, and it gets a little bit violent if things go too far.
Violent?
I have seen violence in my games because of this rule.
That kind of shows how far these card games can go when people take them seriously.
Now, he's not wrong. These things get taken very seriously, even though they're just house rules. To the point where with the progressive Uno rule, it's so commonly used that back in 2019 on Twitter, Mattel stated that stacking was not part of the standard rules of Uno. And this shocked a large amount of people.
Wow.
I don't know how you missed it. I mean, it's nowhere, nothing even resembling this rule exists in the rule book that comes with Uno. So I don't know where this came from. I guess some people just play Uno enough that they don't have to look at the rules too often. Once you add in a house rule, I guess it's easy to confuse what's real and what is an invention of your current reality. Now, there's a couple other house rules we're going to talk about. I play with the next one, but I don't play with the one we're going to talk about after that. The next one is called 7-0.
7-0.
What do you think 7-0 means, Rio?
Something to do with having 7 cards.
Well, I thought you were on the right track, and then you weren't.
Oh
I'm
my
so
goodness.
sorry, but you are incorrect. The 7-0 rule means that when a 7 is played, the person who played the 7 may choose to swap their hand with that of another player.
Hmm.
However, when a 0 is played, all players pass their cards in the direction of gameplay.
Wow.
This is where some people can get real belligerent. I love this rule. I think it adds to the messiness of the game. While there are situations where a messy game is not what you want, I think in this one, it really adds to the fun if you're playing with the right crowd. You get somebody who gets a little too attached to their set of 4 cards over there, and suddenly they've got a switch, and then you get to deal with somebody who's a little bit too angry.
Yeah, the idea of confrontation is never easy, but especially in a game setting where if one person decides to have that kind of an attitude, it can really affect the whole game.
It really can. We don't like people like that. They really take it too far a lot of the time. It's a mess. Nobody wants to deal with that. So I just don't. That's how I do it. Listeners, you can do whatever you want with your games, but if somebody gets too angry, nothing is stopping you from just saying, hey man, there's the door. It's that simple, really. And I do this in a lot of situations. If somebody's getting a little too riled up, going a little too far off the deep end, it's real easy to just show them the door. Get out.
And of course, making sure that they don't forget certain belongings, such as their hat or coat, obviously.
Nobody wants someone who forgets their hat and coat in your house.
That's true. It's just not right.
We don't need that kind of evidence that you were ever here. The last major house rule I'd like to talk about is called jump in. I'm not a fan of this one. I think it's a little too much for me. I mean, because here's the thing. So jump in means that if a card gets played and I have exactly the same card. So say somebody puts down a blue 2. I've got a blue 2 in my hand. You can play it immediately. Foregoing the concept of turns. And whoever was unfortunate enough to be bypassed is in fact bypassed. So if you're playing with 6 people, person across from you decides they're going to put down a yellow 7, barring the 7-0 rule, and you also have a yellow 7, you can throw that down, skipping the 2 people to your right. That's unfortunate for them. I think it just kind of makes it too messy. But I mean, hey, what do you think, Rio? Would you play with this rule?
I don't know. It seems a little bit almost inconvenient in a way. But I'm not sure if I would play with it. I mean, I think either way I'd be a little hesitant because I'd want to play at a standard way first and then kind of learn those other kind of ways. But or I'll just play the way you play and, I'm none the wiser.
I guess you make a good point there. We'll see what happens. So, piggybacking off of the concept of house rules. Of course, I love house rules. I think people can be a lot more innovative than the game companies that are printing these things. But that doesn't mean there's no such thing as variations on Uno. Of course, most of the variations are just a collection of house rules anyway. But there are a few official versions that are variations of Uno. So, there's elimination Uno. I mean, it sounds pretty baseline. I mean, you would think it means that whoever goes out or whoever doesn't go out is eliminated. Something like that. That's what I thought at first before I decided to look into it. I think this one actually sounds pretty cool. So, if you play elimination Uno, then whoever was responsible for allowing somebody else to go out is eliminated from the game.
Oh, wow.
So let's say game is going clockwise. Person on my left, apparently they have a blue card in their hand. I put down a blue and they're able to go out, which makes me the eliminated person. It's not always a matter of being directly next to the person, because sometimes situations happen where things are skipped or reversed or anything like that. But in the situation that somebody is eliminated, which will happen by the end of the round, the person who is responsible gives all of their cards to whoever went out.
Oh, wow.
And play continues like that.
That's a very interesting rule.
You keep going until the game goes out and one person is left. It's almost like playing King of the Hill, except the hill is your discard pile, and the king is just whoever isn't dead.
Very interesting.
Now, the next Uno variation that I happen to enjoy myself, I have played this one. It's called Speed Uno.
Speed Uno.
It's a little bit different. We talked about Speed Monopoly the last time we had the show. Speed Monopoly just changes the game slightly. You add a single die, to slightly speed up the game. But Speed Uno is very different. So first off, you use 2 decks of Uno cards. While you're playing Speed Uno, if you have the same card lying as what is lying on top of the pile, which means same color and same number, you can play it before the next person plays his card, and play continues from you. So it uses the jump in rule. It does base itself on that. That's the main thing. But unlike regular Uno with the 500-point goal, players receive penalty points for what's left in their hand when someone goes out. The game goes until a player has at least 100 points, and then it follows golf rules where lowest score wins. It is what it is, and the scoring is a little bit different as well because we have to make it a bit faster. So in Speed Uno, the point values are that 0 cards equal 50 points. 1 through 9 is the face value. Action cards are 10 points. And wilds and draw 4s are 25. So in this case, you don't want a 0. That's bad. And some people have those Uno decks that have blank cards on them. Those are also worth 25 in this rule set. I personally don't own any blank Uno card decks. I think it's kind of silly just to be able to write whatever. But hey, it did give us that one old meme where you can draw 25 or admit to something, so.
Blank cards in a game. That's a very interesting concept. I mean, if all games had that, imagine if poker had a blank card. That'd be kind of frightening.
What would you write on a blank poker card?
I'm not even sure.
Would it be a substitute for other cards? Or would it be its own special thing?
That's a good question. I mean, being its own special thing would be pretty interesting. But it could be powerful as a substitute as well.
I think either way, it fundamentally changes the game of poker as we know it.
And I think that would be worth a shot. They got to test it out on the televised World Series of Poker. Just mess with the people who've been doing it for 20, 30 years.
Oh, man.
Say, here's a blank card. Figure it out.
Can you imagine that?
That would be amazing.
I think I might actually watch the World Series of Poker if that happened.
Yes, just the already inebriated people of Las Vegas are now having to deal with blank cards.
I think that would be real silly. I'd absolutely watch it. But I digress. So there's one more variation that is not official that I would like to talk about today. There are variations upon variations upon variations, but I chose these 3 specifically because they do kind of facilitate specific play styles in Uno, whether that be aggression or defensiveness, or in this case, just being rude. The third one we're going to talk about is called Pirate Uno.
Pirate Uno.
Pirate Uno. Pirate Uno is pretty simple. It's like playing Uno, but you have to cheat.
You have to cheat in order to advance in the game.
You have to cheat. The whole point of this game, it's not that necessarily that you have to cheat, but it behooves you to cheat.
It behooves to cheat.
By looking at other players' hands, playing multiple cards at once, hiding cards anywhere you can, maybe under the table, maybe in your pocket, up your sleeve. Who knows? Maybe you put it in your mouth.
See, they should have done this with standardized tests in high school. Just do the regular standardized test on a Scantron, and then do a version of it like the next day where you can do whatever you want and cheat in any way, shape, or form that you want. That'd be a great exercise of creativity.
I think that would be really interesting. But I think in that case, you got people that are going to get confused. They might try to cheat on the regular test.
Ooh, well, that's too bad.
Of course, there are other ways you can cheat in Uno as well. You can play the wrong card if no one's really paying attention. Um, you can decide not to pass on cards you may want to keep. So if you're drawing multiple cards, or if you're drawing just one even, and you draw a card you want to keep, but you could play it, nobody has to know in this one. And of course, this utilizes those three main house rules that I talked about earlier, the stacking, 7-0, and jump in. It is an all-around mess of a time. Very hard to do on digital formats, of course, but if you've got an Uno deck and you've got some friends in the room with you, why not give it a try? You could always throw in some alcohol and swearing if you really wanted to, but don't tell them I said that.
Don't want to encourage people too much.
Of course, we do have some official variations of the game as well. Well, official not necessarily, but some versions, some variations on the game that are by no means house rules. So the first one is pretty simple, is when you have a 2-player game. If you just got one of your buddies and yourself playing Uno, then pretty much everything remains the same. The only difference is that in this situation, reverse cards are basically just another set of skips. Because, I mean, if you reverse the order, there's nobody else to go. So you just go back to you. It is what it is. It's very simple. It's very elegant, I think. I like playing 2-man Uno. It's fun. So then you have double standard deck style, sorry. This is where you play Uno with 2 standard card decks. Now, Uno being based on Crazy Eights, everything in Uno is rooted in the fact that it's based on a card game from a standard deck of cards. So if you just throw 2 standard decks together that include jokers, you brand jokers as zeros, and the royalty cards are various special cards. And you've pretty much got an Uno deck.
Very interesting.
I guess in that case, you might be missing your standard wild cards and your +4s, but who cares? Of course, then we have something back in 2002. We saw the advent of Uno Slots.
Uno Slots.
Uno Slots was just a video slot machine based on the card game.
Oh, wow.
I've never played it. I don't know if it's still around. I couldn't really find much info on it because it's just kind of which I mean, of course, the absence of evidence does not in itself constitute evidence, but based on this, I feel like Uno Slots may not have been popular enough to still be around.
Be fascinating if they had it somewhere, though. Like a bowling alley or...
That would be so weird. You just walk into a bowling alley that had its heyday in like 84.
Yep.
They just have this slot machine from '02, and you're like, what is this?
Uno Slots.
And it's Uno. That would be wild. And of course, something I think is interesting, Uno is no stranger to digital gaming, video games. There are 23 various versions, whether it be a physical copy of the game or an app or a digital version of the game that you download on a console. There's 23 versions of digital Uno. Now, the first one came out back in '93 for IBM computers. Of course, then you have mobile device Unos. I could get it on my iPad that I'm using to read my notes right now, but I won't because I'm using it to read my notes. You can get it on current-gen consoles like the Switch and the Xbox.
I've seen some of those Switch games. I saw somebody once play chess on the Nintendo Switch. I thought that was curious. I wonder if you can get to the point where you have to face like the best chess AI, that IBM Watson.
Oh, if you can face IBM Watson in chess, maybe we'll have a chess episode just to talk about that.
That'd be pretty fascinating. And then there's I would say an Uno that would be fascinating would be you versus the Nintendo Switch AI.
I think AI Uno would be interesting. See what happens. I don't know. Maybe the AIs wouldn't be so good at Uno, though.
Yeah.
It's not so much a strategy game as it is a pattern recognition. But let's go back to the timeline a little bit. So we've got some blips in what is the current iteration of Uno's history. So, like I said earlier, back in '92 is when Mattel bought Uno. Previously, early English versions of the game lack something that is standardized on all Uno cards now, which is a white rim around the card.
Very interesting.
It used to be that the color went all the way to the edge. And similarly, old decks of Uno did not have a symbol denoting their action. You open up a card game, an Uno card game right now, chances are you're going to see like the +2 on the draw 2 and a reverse symbol on the reverse card and a circle with the strike through for skip. But back in the day, when I was young and I played Uno, we played with card games with cards that had just letters on them. Reverse, skip, and draw just had R, S, and D on them. It was not great if you were ever playing with anyone that didn't know English, but it is what it is. Now, we move forward a little bit. In 2010, there was a game released called Uno Mod. It's official as far as I am aware, and it uses symbols for everything. There are no letters and no words. So it has the standard symbols for reverse, skip, and draw, but it also doesn't say wild on the wild and the wild draw 4s. I'm not sure what the symbol is, if any. That is a lie. I do remember. It just doesn't have anything on it. It just has the stylized shape of the wild card. A little bit more forward in 2017, we got Uno Color Ad, which was the first version of Uno made with color blindness in mind.
Oh, wow.
So it suddenly became accessible to a smattering of more people.
That's very interesting.
And continuing this theme of accessibility in Uno, the most recent notable date is that in 2019, Mattel released a Braille version of Uno.
Wow, that's actually quite innovative.
Now, this was so successful, the Braille edition of Uno, that Mark Riccobono, I believe is how you pronounce his name, he's the president of the National Federation of the Blind. He said that the fact that a person is now able to play a classic game of Uno straight out of the box with both blind and sighted friends or family members is a truly magical, meaningful, moment for our community.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, that's really a forward-thinking way of trying to help out, a group of people who would otherwise not be able to play that game or many other kinds of games as well. So that's actually quite thoughtful.
I agree. I would love to get my hands on a Braille deck. I don't personally have any friends that are blind, but in the case that I do meet someone, I would love to be able to introduce them into this world of tabletop games that I do so love to talk about and experience.
No one is safe from Alex and his games. All shall be targeted.
Well, now you make it sound like a threat.
Well, when you're as good as you are, I'm not. It's kind of intimidating.
Well, so a little bit more info here. We're going to talk about Uno in the current world. Uno as it is right now.
Uno for today's generation.
How many versions of Uno are there? I will say right now, there are a lot. When I first looked this up, I found out the number was much higher than I had anticipated. And I'm curious, Rio, how many versions of Uno do you think exist, including variant decks and spin-offs and special decks?
Well, I mean, I imagine that in Europe there are various versions of Uno, and depending on the country. I'm sure the British and the French don't want the same Uno deck, so they would take two separate ones. So I would say there's probably upwards of 50.
Well, you're not wrong.
But there's significantly more than 50.
But there is significantly
more
than 50.
I mean, it's good to hear that Uno's has apparently now made it to North Korea.
Really?
Well, I don't know if there's that many versions. Surely there is.
Surely, but you never know, I suppose. We could look into it, but
so, okay, there's more than 100.
Closer, but let's go back to your first statement for a moment. 50, upwards of 50. Here's the thing, Rio. The actual number is just shy of tenfold that answer. There are 483 official decks of Uno.
Well, you heard it here, folks. 483 different types of Uno. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, they got one for people here in America. They got some for people in Canada, the more polite version of Uno, I'm assuming. I mean, that's impressive.
I don't even want to think about it. I mean, there's licensed Unos, there's variant rule Unos, there's anniversary edition of Unos because we've had 5 decade anniversaries. Um, there's a lot. Speaking of a lot of Uno, since its invention, Uno has sold more than 150 million copies, and it is currently available in more than 80 countries.
Wow, and I imagine the family of the that barber is still garnering some amount of royalties from that.
I would certainly hope so if I
I
was
mean,
them.
that's incredible. I mean, it surprises me that Uno hasn't been around as long as I thought, just because how ubiquitous it is. But the fact that it's only been around for about 50 years and yet here it is, worldwide known, is quite impressive.
On top of this as well, Uno sales are still trending upward. Every year, Uno sales have increased.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite literally at the dollar store, so you can get it anywhere. It's quite something.
So, we're going to go back to Merle.
Merle, our
Robbins.
man Merle.
Something a little bit not so fun, but definitely a fact. He and his wife sold their house to finance those original 5,000 copies.
Oh my goodness.
I cannot imagine selling my home for a card game. That's a lie. I absolutely would if I had a good enough idea.
I mean, he must have been confident in that investment if he thought it was worth selling a house.
Well, I mean, look how well it's gone. 10 cents off of more than 150 million copies? That's a lot.
It really is.
So a couple more things relating to Uno in the modern world. Just a couple of things that I don't understand. I don't get it. I'm really not. Maybe I'm just not a part of the young crowd that understands why you would do these things. But Uno has a couple of adaptations. So the first one we're going to talk about, Uno has a game show.
Oh my goodness, a game show. Now, is it hosted by someone we know, like Steve Harvey or Regis Philbin?
I don't believe so. It's not very popular as far as I'm aware, but originally this idea came up in 2013 with the Gurin Company. It was going to be produced as a half-hour daily strip with a $100,000 cash jackpot. There's also a primetime version in which contestants competed for $1 million.
Huh.
This never came to fruition.
My goodness, but it was pitched at some point.
It was, and the idea came back. And if I'm not mistaken, there is currently in production a game show from 2020 that features audience participation, physical challenges, and trivia for this Uno game show. I don't know how those things relate to Uno, but apparently these 4 teams do those things, as well as having audience participation.
And somehow, at least in my opinion, it would be possibly more entertaining than some of what is considered a game show now, including The Masked Singer and some of these other shows. I bet Uno would be somewhat interesting.
I feel like it could be.
But execution is something else.
If it's executed properly. And of course, this one I'm not a fan of. Uno is getting a movie.
Yes, I believe it's going to be shown at the Cannes Film Festival, going for a Palme d'Or.
This movie, it's an action heists movie.
Heisting with Uno. That's a concept I've never thought I would ever think of.
Set in underground urban Atlanta.
Wait, Atlanta. So this is about Atlanta?
This isn't about Atlanta. And potentially, it is going to feature Lil Yachty as a lead. No other cast have been rumored, and no official cast listing has been released. But it is believed that Lil Yachty is the idea for who they want to play the lead. And I don't know how you get a heist from Uno. I don't know what
why
the
they
deal
chose
is.
Lil Yachty. I mean,
And I don't know why they chose Lil Yachty.
That's incredible. I mean, he goes from broccoli to the big stage, I guess. Huh?
I guess so. But there you have it, folks. Uno is for everything that it is, kind of an anomaly, and how recent it is, and yet how ubiquitous it has become. It's crazy. I love Uno. Rio's not going to love Uno in a few minutes, though. Um,
I'm going to rue this day.
he sure will. But hopefully, with this newfound knowledge, with this new information about the card game, you guys get to go out and enjoy the game for yourselves. It's always a fun time to play games with friends, and of course, that's the whole reason I started this show. So this has been Table Talk. I'm Alex G,
And I'm Rio.
and we have had a blast, hopefully entertaining you with this card game. So I'll see you guys next time.